one thing I wanted to do to kind of build off of what you were just sharing is maybe compare and contrast BD at an early stage versus BD at a later stage, and what are the differences there?
BD at an early stage is, well, BD at an early stage, think about an early stage startup, usually just trying to feel around for ways to get things going, right? So on the foundational side, like I said, you're trying to appeal to someone who's a gatekeeper and say, we need to be in business, please allow us to do that. This is Kayak going to the airlines and saying, list on Kayak back in 2004. It's Square and the payment relationships at the beginning. The distribution deals tend to come at a startup with like really big companies. And this is where the impedance mismatch starts to come into play because big companies have very different goals than small companies, but there's usually a BD team at a big company that is tasked with the idea of working with small companies. And so there's a few key sort of pitfalls then that occur when a small company works with a big company. One is that if you do a deal with like a company with a lot of users, let's say Yelp or Yahoo or something like that, well, all of a sudden they're most of your user base. And you can easily confuse the BD deal for product market fit because users are coming in through the door. And all of a sudden you've misaligned whether or not you are truly making progress in connecting with your customer base. The second one is big companies are full of executives. They're doing stuff with small companies. Executives change all the time. Strategy changes all the time. And so when you have these relationships with a big company and an executive leaves for a bigger job or changes roles within the org, whatever it is, all of a sudden you may find yourself without the sponsor that you needed to make that deal successful. And suddenly you've placed a big bet on this relationship that no longer is sustainable anymore. And that kind of leads to the third one, which is it's very common for startups not to account for the hidden costs of deal management. So you say to a large third party, hey, sure, let's do a BD deal. We'll do a nice integration. It'll take 1 month of time, 2 engineers. We'll still work on our core business on our own, and we'll do this BD deal to get some users into the door. Well, 99 out of 100% of the time, that turns into a much longer project with many more resources that the startup can ill afford to have. But it's such a big deal, you can't say no and just stop it because of the sunk cost sort of dynamics that are at play there. You've sold it to your board, you've maybe even announced the deal, et cetera, et cetera. So it can be really, really challenging to do that. There's a couple ways to sort of handle that as a startup if you're doing on the startup side. One is what I said earlier, which is be thinking all the time about how to turn this kind of bespoke relationship into something repeatable. One, to diversify yourself so you're not just relying on one potential distribution partner, but also so that you can ultimately hand it over into a playbook that you can staff appropriately, get it out of abstract land and get it into concrete land. A great example is how Square started out with a trial balloon with the Apple Store selling the Square card reader, and then over time really mechanized that so that we could go from 5,000 to 100,000 stores around the country in the course of a couple of years. The other thing you can do is manage and limit get live resources. It's really hard to do, but like really, really tightly constrain how much time you're spending on it. And once you start to go outside the bounds, reinvestigate the opportunity and make sure it sings for its supper. And then the third way to handle it, which I think is really important, is make sure that you are keeping your direct relationship with the consumer your primary goal, and that any distribution deal is in service of your primary relationship. A great example I like to use is the Kayak AOL deal. When Kayak got founded back in 2004, to get some traffic, they did a deal with AOL to power travel search. And it ran into all the problems that we're talking about, but it was a lot of traffic. What Kayak was really, really focused on doing is using AOL traffic to generate Kayak users on their own, to make the product better, to figure out how to get Kayak to work on SEM, which was a nascent opportunity on Google at the time. And they really leveraged the AOL relationship to build Kayak effectively by keeping a really tight focus on who was the first altar they needed to pray for, the direct relationship with the consumer. So that's a quick primer on BD at a small company. Daniel, when you think about BD at a big company, do you mean a large company working with small companies or a larger startup?
It's a great question. I think either of those, whichever you think is most interesting. I think what I was trying to draw out of that is you're obviously focused on very different things. Whether it's, I imagine maybe at a large company, you're focused on maintaining your position in the market, kind of advantaging yourself by getting access to or working with the best startups. But it's just a very different mentality. So I guess just curious to explore that a little bit.
No, it totally is. And it also depends when you're a large company on whether or not, there's BD relationships that relate to the infrastructure and the technology of your business. all the time. You're always trying to find customers and potential technology partners and that sort of thing. But then there's also what happens in a lot of big companies is they want to work with startups who have, interesting products, interesting growth that they can showcase to make their products more successful for their audience. And like I said, there's whole teams doing that. And I've worked on those teams, and it's hard because in those capacities and roles in BD at a larger company of any kind, you find yourself trying really hard not to succumb to some of these impedance mismatch challenges, but it's really tough because these are not anyone's fault. They're just inherent to the job of business development at a big company. But even at a big company, what you're trying to do is, if you're working with small companies, is to the best of your ability, turn BD relationships into programs. So that's why you see at so many companies, for example, at Twitter, there is a DevRel relationship with developers as opposed to doing one-off sort of BD deals with each of them. And that sounds kind of obvious now, but before kind of the age of the API, each of those relationships were done sort of on a one-off basis, right? And you had teams of BD people kind of doing that. The big thing at a growth stage company, and kind of Square in the 2012, 2014 early days was a good example of this, is just this eyes are bigger than your mouth problem, because there is just so many damn opportunities once you're onto something to partner with people that are of all sizes and jurisdictions. And staying focused on what the point is of these deals is really, really crucial, hard to do. I think there's two jobs of a BD person at that stage. One is kind of the tops down, like here's a strategy of the company. How do we partner with people to achieve our strategy more quickly? But there's also the important bottoms up role, which is as you're out there in the marketplace meeting with companies who are doing innovative things, how do you help to see around corners for your management team so that you can be ahead of technology curves, ahead of consumer zeitgeist changes, and then ultimately maybe even lead to M&A?